Oh yeah, fair enough. Well, my view is that the socialist groups in Europe are getting stronger, and the only way to get rid of corporate strangulation and banking is and with them all united.
So I went around
Anyway,
It's a dangerous man over there. I recognise it's Keynote.
This is a very
You're in the front row, yeah, so I see.
No, not for okay. Are we all
Just about to pick up.
good afternoon, good evening, and welcome, comrades. Comrades. It says here, rousing introduction. Okay. Should I shout louder? I don't think I should do that. We are in a fight. Let's face it, we are in a fight. And we have to do what I thought was not necessary when I started to think about, my role in the campaign some little while ago, which is basically to actually get on doorsteps, to get not just our members but other members out as well. It looks like that's a silly thought, because I think we do now have to get to our grassroots and indeed the broader public as well now, on the basis of full simple electoral campaign. We are in an electoral campaign in terms of the organisation of it. I thought there was going to be a few posters up, and then the general issues would be debated, and the great broadcasting agencies and the newspapers would do they're doing the job, but not on our side. So we have to get to counter that, and the only way we can do that is get on the doorstep. And already I know that people are already on the doorstep, whereas some of you are on the doorstep and do a lot of work. So with that thought, can I introduce John, who is familiar to a lot of you, I would think. John was Labour MP in Southampton, Itchen for a long time, and even I knew that in Liverpool. I even knew that you were Labour MP in Itchen. From 1992 to 2015, he held various offices of government. He bravely stepped down over Iraq, and not many ministers did that. And I think it's to his credit to actually have taken that step. And though he returned a little while later, I think he's really done his best when he stepped down. That's only my comment. He's now Professor at the University of Winchester in politics. Yeah, and he runs the university's Centre for English Identity and Politics. That's really interesting, isn't it? I think, and I wonder. We'll see what way it goes, but his services may be called in enormously, I think, if things go a certain way. He's involved also with the LSE. He's a visiting professor at LSE as well. So he'll be, I guess, looking at this from both a practicing politician point of view and that rather airy-fairy position that I've got in common with him from an academic position as well. John, away you go.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. Firstly, congratulations to Mike and everybody else for organising this meeting and actually for getting such a good turnout on a Friday evening of non-football followers. You are allowed to stay in around 8 o'clock tomorrow night, I think, after that main trail. No, it's fantastic that you are here, and it is crucially important, and the fact you've come shows that you know that. I'm not actually, particularly when I'm sat next to the Jean Monnet Chair in European Politics at the University of Portsmouth, I'm not going to pretend that I'm a European policy expert. I was a minister for 10 years. I did have some engagement with the European Union. I saw it at first hand, but Mike asked me to talk really about why Labour Party members should be involved in this campaign, what it's about. And my approach, frankly, as you will see, is more visceral, more almost emotional about my politics than some of the arguments that some people love to have about the detail of the European Union. And Mike suggested I should talk about why people on the left, centre-left, Democratic Socialists, Social Democrats, whichever label you want to give yourself in the party, why people should have no hesitation about the Remain campaign. I think for me the starting point is to look at the origins of our own party and our own movement. The origins of our party were in trade unions. They were in the idea of solidarity, of collective strength. Wherever you are in life, if you as an individual are relatively weak against the powerful, you are at your absolute weakest when you are on your own. If you want to achieve any change, and the whole history of our movement has told that, you have to work with other people. You have to band together with other people who share the same interests in you. Otherwise, the powerful always get their way, and it's not usually in our interest. Not only is that as true today as it was when our party is founded, it's more true. And it's also more challenging because the forces that we are up against are international every bit as much as they're national. When our movement was started, people talked about the bosses and the people who owned the industry and the capitalists. They were all in the same country. And their companies were. They may be global because we had an empire, but that's where they were. Now they are international. Look at the news that we see every day. The future of the British steel industry hangs in the balance. The industry is in Wales, it's owned in India, it's being put out of business by the dumping of Chinese steel on the world market. And whilst, yes, there are many things that our government could have done differently that would have put the steel industry in a better place, the reality is it is part of global economic forces and we have to respond to that. Any of you been online today? If you have, the data that's been gathered from the websites you visited, I'm not implying anything by this at all, but the data that's been gathered by the websites that you've been visited is being analysed globally. It's being looked at globally to identify what sort of person you are globally, so the global market of people who want to sell things to you are able to target you with the advertising. What's the big challenge we all talk about in the party today? Austerity. But austerity, yes, but that's a symptom. It's a symptom of a system of finance that was dangerously out of control and is still dangerously out of control. And the crisis that's affecting Greece or us or the rest of Europe didn't start in Greece. It didn't start in Europe. It started in America with banks giving loans to people who couldn't possibly pay them back, which infected the whole of the financial system. It's a global situation we're up against. As we speak today, if you read the papers today, scientists are warning that because of climate change, the Great Barrier Reef of Australia may now have got beyond the point of rescue. The news story domestically this morning was about the amount we need to spend on flood prevention because of climate change. The Euros, as I mentioned, started today under, as we all know, under the shadow of terrorism in France and Belgium, and everybody is hoping to get through the next few weeks without anything awful happening. There are tens of thousands of people fleeing war, fleeing economic hardship, fleeing repression, all trying to come to Europe. Many more would like to come here, more frankly than we can manage, to be honest. We have to tackle the causes of that migration at its roots, where the wars are, where the hardship is, where the repression is. You can all do your own list, have your own list of priorities, your own top concerns. But just ask yourself, which of these problems, whether it's the economy, terrorism, climate change, even mass global migration, which of those are we honestly better able to tackle on our own instead of working with other people? And that to me is the root of the reason I think, with all its flaws, I want us to stay in the European Union, because we are weaker apart than we are together. Now, I'm realistic about the politics of this. There are some people who call themselves internationalists, who genuinely see themselves as global citizens rather than national citizens. It's only about 1 in 10% of the population, to be honest. Most people, if we're honest, put our own country first, the people we know, the friends, the neighbours around us. But you don't have to be an internationalist to understand that our own national interest is best served by working with other people. And that's what the EU, with all its flaws, is all about. And the thing is, you know, I often think we've got, 40 years, we've got so used to living with the EU, which is not a perfect organisation, which does have its flaws. We've got so used to living with it that we only talk about its flaws, and we don't talk about what it has actually done. And I was struck the other day, as Mike knows, I'll have to leave fairly soon after speaking, go back and pick up my son from Scouts. So I got a young son of 11. And he asked me a few weeks ago, he was watching something on Newsround, I think. He said, Dad, he said, why are there always wars in the Middle East? And it really struck me that he can ask that question, and I said to him, almost at any time in history, in the past 1,000 years, your question would have been, why is Europe always at war? You are almost the first generation that has had the ability to ask that question, why are the wars somewhere else? Because you know, a lot of people similar age to me in this room, my father in the RAF, my mother was in the RAF, my uncle was killed, his troop ship was torpedoed, my grandfather was 4 years in the First World War, and actually go back through the generations, that was pretty much taken for granted. Not everybody, but somebody would be fighting in a war somewhere on Europe. We take that for granted at our peril, because things are much more fragile, always, than people say. Well, you know, before the massacre in Srebrenica in Bosnia, everybody had assumed that nothing like that could happen on European soil again. But it did when the institutions failed and the politics failed. And although David Cameron got mocked for talking about risks of war, if you follow through the logic of what the quitters say, what is good for Britain is good for other European countries too. And if you actually see a crumbling of the European Union into individual nation states again, with no framework for bringing people together at a political level, then those risks are ever greater. And with somebody like Putin in Russia, what he's doing in Ukraine, his threats to the Baltic states, we can all see what can happen. Now, so is the economy too. We can't do peace on our own. We can't do the economy on our own. If you're going to deal with the tax evaders and the monopolists and the exploiters like Google and Amazon and whatever, yes, the EU's got its flaws, but at least they're tackling those things. They're taking measures at that level against that. If you want to deal with climate change, if you want to raise standards of environmental protection, if we want to have cooperation at an international level, the EU is what we have to hand. Now, I know sometimes, and this is probably not the audience where you hear it most, because I guess most of you are committed Remain campaigners, but let's run through the arguments because you might hear them from our colleagues. Nonetheless, there are people on the left who say, well, I'm not sure about the European Union. And they come up with a number of arguments. They sometimes say, well, really, isn't it just a sort of capitalist club? A business conspiracy? Well, let's face the truth about that. In the modern world that we live in, we always have to do two things. We do have to create the conditions for successful business, for wealth creation. It is dynamic, the capitalist economy. Markets do create opportunities and innovation. But the second thing we always have to do is make sure that the benefits serve the common good. And that's not really any longer an argument in the Labour Party. If you look at the people that John McDonnell's appointed as his economic advisor, Mazzucato, Stiglitz, Blanchflower, these are all pro-market people. They're people who say, but we also need to do these things to make sure that markets work in the common interest. And I think that's actually the common ground in the Labour Party. And the reality is, though, about the EU is there's always going to be a battle between people who want the business side purely to have the upper hand and the people who want the public good to have the upper hand. And at the moment that's probably tipped too far away from the public good and not enough in favour of what we would want. But that isn't because the EU is flawed. It's because people like us have been losing elections across the European Union. It's because the governments that are in power in the European Union have actually not been taken the same view as us. But let's never forget, we have won and have still remained victors on some key arguments, like the social market, like the idea that workers' rights, holidays should be an embedded thing across each European nation, so there's not an absolute rush to the bottom. We've actually lost that argument. We lost that argument here in the 80s and the 90s. We were able to do something when we were in power. We're out of power now, so we've lost the argument again now. It's only the European Union that means we're committed to those rights as a floor for every worker across the European Union. But we'll never get the European Union we want while we keep losing elections. And that's here in Germany and everywhere else. That's true. You see, the other thing that sometimes people on the left say is, the EU's undemocratic. And they often say, you know, look at Greece. Greece had an election, they took a stance on austerity, and the European Union imposed austerity on them, so the European Union is not democratic. Unfortunately, for us, it wasn't the EU that did that. It's the fact that people across the EU voted for governments that wanted to do that. Unfortunately, the things that we dislike about the EU sometimes aren't because of a bureaucracy in Brussels. It's because we haven't managed to win the arguments in voters in Europe. And it's quite a mistake to blame the so-called Brussels bureaucracy for politics as we know it, and politics and democracy. So the EU is not a panacea, but it's not the cause of all of our problems. But not everybody out there sees it like this, and these are the arguments we've got to have. Because there are people in Portsmouth, people in Southampton, and other parts of the country who have got a fair case when they say we have been failed by politics. You know, you used to have a shipyard. It used to be our shipyard. I'm not going to go on about that, but now neither of us have got a shipyard. We don't have people making forward transit bands anymore. Technology has changed. Optical fibre was invented at Southampton University the year I went there in 1971, but it put the Pirelli cable works out of business. Because nobody wants huge copper cable to go under the sea anymore because we've got optical fibre. And it's true that a way of life has been disappearing for people. Those big industrial jobs, the well-paid jobs you could get without necessarily having a raft of qualifications, provided you were prepared to work hard, get an apprenticeship, you could get on, you could probably buy your home, possibly even get into management if you showed the aptitude for doing it. The institutions, the social clubs and things that went with that have disappeared. And so there's a lot of people feeling that whatever's replaced that and whatever opportunities that's created for other people in our society, it hasn't created much for them and their families. And then of course you have the impact of immigration into communities that were already feeling bruised and fearful and worried about things. And they're very open to the argument that somehow this is the fault, of Europe, of the political class in Europe, that it's Europe that has imposed all these things and failed to make them happen. Well, I think we've got to be honest as a party, because we were in government for quite a long time. Yes, politicians have failed those people to some extent, but it's not because of the European Union. It's because we haven't done the right things, had the right policies to actually create the sort of jobs that would have made a difference. But what we've got to do, we have to respect those fears and those concerns and actually show that we understand why things seem bad when everything that seemed certain a generation ago have actually disappeared. And I'm afraid sometimes, and I sure it won't be people in this room, but there are people in the Labour Party who've made this worse rather than better. People in the Labour Party who've assumed that everybody who's worried about the pace of change in their community or pressure on public services or whatever it might be is a racist. And actually people are just talking about too much change. They've lost the jobs, they've lost the security, they've lost the community organisations, and now even the very language around them is changing. These are understandable things for people to be concerned about, and we need to be respectful of that whilst not accepting that the European Union can be blamed for all of these issues. So when we engage with those people, let me say a few things which I think we need to repeat time and time again. Firstly, the overwhelming evidence is that people will be worse off if we leave the European Union. Worse off in the short term, but worse off in the longer term too. There's a huge amount of nonsense being talked by Johnson and people like that about, we'll still be able to trade. Well, of course we'll still be able to trade. We need to understand, I'll just tell you a story to explain how it will go wrong. When I was a minister, the European Union, for good reasons, wanted to raise environmental standards for motor vehicles. Okay? The strong British motor industry came to me and other ministers and said, we cannot meet these standards in the time that they're being imposed. And as always happens in these circumstances, there was a bit of truth on both sides. The European Commission were doing the right thing by raising standards. After all, we know that 40,000 people a year die because of pollution, air pollution in this country, so raising standards was the right thing to do. But actually they had over-regulated. They were pushing things faster than people would have been able to make. And so we negotiated a position that was a sensible compromise between the aspirations of the Commission and the needs of the motor industry. And our motor industry has continued to go from strength to strength. What would be different if we were outside is there would still be standards that you had to meet to sell into the European market, but we wouldn't have a voice in what those standards were. And it won't happen overnight, but bit by bit, decision by decision by decision, we will be seen by industry and others unable to exercise influence on their behalf. And as that gathers pace and the new investment decisions come, why not go somewhere where we do have influence, rather than stay somewhere where we don't? So people will be worse off long term, not just in the short term. The second thing is, and I think this does work with a lot of voters, maybe not all of them, but when these debates take place, right from the very beginning, people have said on the quitter side, you can't believe the IMF, the Treasury, whoever it is, you can't believe them. They've been wrong in the past. And most organisations have been wrong at some time in the past. Just remember who we are meant to believe. Right. Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and Nigel Farage. Now, I don't think actually even the most dedicated Leave campaigner actually would put those three at the top of their list of people most likely to tell them the truth. And when we talk to people, and they talk about these issues, can you believe these people? Well, you've got a choice. You don't have to believe the IMF, the OECD, the EU, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and the long list of the rest of them. But do you really want to just trust Johnson, Gove, and Farage? And a lot of voters know that they're on weak ground. Then there is this issue about immigration. We will not win these voters by adopting the position that there's absolutely nothing wrong with immigration, nothing to worry about, and anybody who is worried about it or against it and critical in any way is a bad, nasty person. Right? There are people in this country who genuinely have that very liberal view that all immigration controls are wrong, and there's no real issues that anybody should talk about. It's about 15% of the population. Usually, in my experience, about 80% of Labour Party members, but about 15% of the wider population actually hold that view. So if we try and insist that's the argument, we'll lose it, particularly the next fortnight. On the other hand, if you're talking to somebody who has decided that they don't care if the sky falls on their head, as long as there are immigration controls at every border, you're not going to win the argument with those people either. The next 2 weeks will be won by the vast majority of people between those two positions, who actually understand this is a complicated issue with trade-offs. On the one hand, they may worry if they have to wait a long time to see the GP, or if they're Catholic in Southampton, they can no longer get their kids to the primary school they used to go to because there are more Polish people living near to the school than there used to be. That upsets them. On the other hand, they're the same people who understand the nurses in the health service and the carers that they work with, and that will be really struggling behind them. They are people who understand that it's reasonable to be pissed off if you're working somewhere and the employer starts bringing in Eastern European labour on contract jobs at a lower rate, stops and taking on core work. On the other hand, they're people who understand they're quite pleased that people from Eastern Europe pick all the Hampshire watercress we buy in the supermarket because it's a horrible job and they wouldn't want to do it. So in other words, you're talking to the people who can see both sides of it and who understand this is a real issue, but the costs of trying to deal with it in the way the quitters want to do are far too high against the benefits we get from being in the European Union. And above all, in my entire experience of political campaigning, listening to what people say rather than dismissing what they say before they've started is absolutely crucial. And then two final points, then I'll finish. One is about the future of our country. I've been deliberately talking about the Brexit campaign, the Leave campaign, as quitters. And I think that is the language that we should be using. Because while they talk about taking control, and who wouldn't want to take control, the reality is their worldview is this is no longer a country that can exercise influence and leadership in Europe or the world. All their language is about how we get pushed around, how nobody listens to us, how we can't take any decisions for ourselves. But their view of us is as a country that will not matter so much in the future. They are the people who've actually lost faith in the future of this country. And many of the voters that we need to reach over the next 2 weeks do believe in, well, forgive the expression, the greatness of Britain, the importance of our country, a pride in our history, the fact that we have shown leadership when it has mattered on crucial issues around the world. 3 times in the 20th century, in the First World War, the Second World War, and also in the Cold War, where we stood for democracy, we stood for freedom, we stood for liberty, when others weren't doing that. Well, actually, being in the EU is about still being that country that believes that we have values that are values beyond our shores, values for other people, that we have a role to play. So I don't think any of us should have the slightest hesitation in talking about our patriotism and our belief in our country as part of our defence of being in the European Union. And then, of course, there's this final point, and you'll understand it was important. The young people are much more likely to support staying in the EU. They have grown up with it, they see the benefits of it, they imagine themselves working around Europe, all the other things that come with it. They're also the least likely to vote. And they are people we must also reach over the next 2 weeks. So not a detailed technical exposition, I'm afraid, of any particular bit of European Union legislation or the finer details of qualified majority voting, on which we'll pass to Mike. No questions on those issues. But a fundamental view that this campaign is not separate from what I believe in as a Labour Party politician. It's absolutely integral to what I believe in as a Labour politician. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was a rousing introduction. I had a hand up over there, Ian, and another one.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, John, for that great speech. I've got a couple of points today, really. One, something you mentioned earlier on, John, about being on your own. I've been on my own for the last week, canvassing and leafleting. I've had no support from anyone in the Labour Party. I ran out of leaflets yesterday, and luckily through providing me a load today. But what I'm saying is, you can't do it on your own. You know, we need more people. We need the membership. Now, I am the secretary for Southsea. We've got 1,000 people in Portsmouth, members of the Labour Party. Now, you try getting them out on the door, try getting them to do anything. It's impossible. We've had over 500 people join since last May, young people as well. And this is where my big problem is. We are not getting the young people out. Look at the audience tonight. There's no young people here. Very few young people here. I look at the membership list and see when they... Puppy! Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Very few. And overall, compared to the percentage, right? That is where we've got a problem. Now, yesterday I got a leaflet through my door from the Leave campaign that was targeted at students. It was addressed to my daughter. You had one as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to dress me yesterday.
Jackie had one as well, and they were targeted. I don't know where they got the mailing list from, but it was targeted all at students, right? Now we aren't doing that, you know, and that's what worries me. The students aren't coming on board, and we can't seem to drive them in, right? We've tried, but I don't know how we're going to do it. So I suggested months ago that we could get a place in the university, a stall, just to target registration, just to get people on board, and it didn't happen. Nobody got on board with it. And this is where I think we're failing. You know, we need the young people. That's what we need. We need people on the streets. We need them getting out there and doing things, you know? That's all I say.
Thank you, Ian.
Have you spoken to the Liberals and the Tories?
Sorry?
Pardon?
Well, it doesn't, I'm sorry, your answer actually illustrated a big problem.
No, this wasn't from the Lib Dems or the Tories. This was from the Leave campaign, this leaflet. It wasn't from the...
I know, but we have in Portsmouth South the Tories who's a Remainer. We have the Lib Dems who are all Remainers.
Well, we do. We have the stalls. George will tell you, we have the stalls that are open to anyone. Anyone can come to the stalls.
Yes, yeah. Let's
not actually a member,
question.
Half member.
Right, okay. Let's have questions rather than too many statements, shall we?
Yeah, it's a question actually, John. I mean, I agree, yeah, with a great deal of what you're saying. Obviously, I'm very much in favour of remaining in the European Union. But one thing that I think you hadn't addressed, or you glazed over a bit, was over the question of free movement of workers. Now, that's something that the European Union is very keen about. It's something I'm very keen about, but it's something that is the hardest argument for us to get across. because it's on that issue that we're losing votes to the Leave campaign. I'm not saying that all the people who are supporting the Leave campaign on the basis of immigration are racists or xenophobics. Although there are a substantial number of people who are that way inclined, they are the backbone of a lot of the Leave campaign propaganda. But nevertheless, unless we do address the question of the free movement of work and start to persuade people that is a good thing for the people in this country as well as the people in the rest of Europe, and particularly a good thing for the young people in this country and the rest of the Europe, then we're going to have difficulty in winning the arguments in the ballot box in 2 weeks' time. I think we've got to take it on. We can't just ignore it. We've got to take it on and argue stance.
Well, I think my own view is, from my experience of the campaign in Southampton, is that you are more likely to gain support and a hearing if you acknowledge that large numbers of people moving under the free movement of labour does actually cause quite real issues for people. I think if you try to persuade people that they are wrong to have any of these concerns, then you won't get anywhere. Let me give you a classic example in Southampton, which I logged between 2004 and 2006, and I know it doesn't make me popular, it says, but the day rate for a bricklayer in Southampton fell in 18 months from £120 a day to £60 a day. That's actually what happened. Now, that is great if you were middle class and you wanted a conservatory built. It was pretty bad news if you were a local builder who built conservatories. And we won't be able to make the argument these things didn't happen. And nor is it actually pretty much good sort of saying, well, I'll give you 0.5% on GDP if all of that went to the better off 20% of the population and not to the bottom 20%. So I think the argument myself is to say, look, there are real issues and we have to find better ways of mitigating them. And actually some of the things around waiting for entitlement to benefits and things like that, though absolutely effective enforcement of housing law, effective enforcement of minimum wage legislation, of workers' rights and all the rest of it, actually will deal with the worst impacts of some of those changes. But I think you then have to balance it with the things that people see as benefits. That people do understand that some of the jobs are being taken are people that people didn't want to do, in caring and things of that sort. You're right absolutely about children, that actually if you lose the free movement of people in, you're bound to lose the free movement of people out. And many people will understand those and try and think of local examples. The one I always give in Southampton, and you would be the same, the history might be slightly different. When the shipyard, not that I'm bitter, but when the shipyard was in Southampton, right, there would be periods of time when there were no workers in the yards, and no jobs in the yards. People would go to Germany. People of a certain age group, because there are a number of this room, remember a programme called Our Leaders Aid. What was that? That was about migrant workers in the European Union. Okay? And people understand that. And you say, look, our own people have done that when they needed to, and it worked for them. So I take a slightly different view, which is I don't think you get very far in just trying to say there's not a problem with this. I think you're much better to say there's real advantages and there's real disadvantages. We're better off working with the current system to tackle the disadvantages so that we can keep the advantages. And I think you won't win everybody with that. There are a lot of people who are open to that fairly balanced view of the issues. But they're very resistant if we try to tell people they're wrong not to understand why this is in everybody's interests. So perhaps we have a different view, but that's my advice on arguing it.
Can I just add one thing? I think I'm right in saying that Jeremy made a speech a little while ago suggesting that a policy that was going to be applied locally to assist problems with health, education, etc., etc. And I can't remember the name of it, but there was a policy around where extra money was available to local authorities in order to deal with a local problem. I mean, that is one positive decision that could be taken by a Labour government that would at least ameliorate some of the problems.
And you know, I think we can have a discussion with people about this. We had a discussion on this with a very mixed group of people, not party people, in Southampton about 18 months ago. One of the things that actually came out as very popular was shifting the enforcement around minimum wage and things like that to local authorities, and letting our local authorities keep the income from fines and penalties. You know, nobody. What we discovered in the discussion was that nobody believes the government ever enforces anything. So when you sort of say the government's going to crack down on the minimum wage, everyone says, no, they're not. If you say if your council has the power and they can keep the money, funny enough, that actually has more credibility with people. If you did that, we know, all of us in our own cities, which the dodgy agencies are. I can tell you which ones they are in Southampton. I can tell you which ones deal with the illegal migrants. I can tell you which ones deal with the Eastern European migrants and exploit them. I can tell you which ones deal with people well and deal with them properly. At local level, we've got that knowledge. So have the people we work with. If you shifted enforcement powers at that local level, you're right. There's talk about having a much bigger fund. The Labour government had something called the Migration Impact Fund, but it was far too small to have an impact, to be honest. It was a bit tokenistic, but we could do something like that on a much bigger scale. So if suddenly there's a very large movement of people into a particular area, there's resources available to do this. So there are things we can do. They don't resolve all the problems, and we should never try and pretend they will. But we can say there's things we can do about it.
I think we are trying to answer a very simple question on the other side by very sophisticated arguments. Now, when people say to me, being on the doorstep, just like this local election, right, these are the jobs, those are the taking, that's the wage levels. And they did right. And I'm not arguing with them. But the other side is actually a very simple argument. We actually economically call them a better off in. We have a world economic crisis. We have printed $8,000 trillion plus to keep the banks and the money system afloat. Right? Now you don't in that position move out of your biggest market. If you do, you've got lots of companies going, you have the banks going to Zurich, you say to them, your job will be at risk if we go out. I promise you that in 5 years. It's a simple argument, and actually, if you just look at it, OECD, all these bodies we're talking about have said that. And they said, oh, you mustn't do the scare tactic. Actually, if you're a person on basic wages, or you're just getting by, we know that over the next 20 years what the crisis looks like. We have to say to people, actually it is scary. No, they have no idea what coming out is like. It's a simple argument. You say, right, we'll have that argument about people in or out, sophisticated. This is a simple argument.
I think what I'd say is this, is that every conversation is different. Okay? So, and you've got to use your judgment about the conversation you're in. There are some people who, if they think you're changing the subject, some people find that this is more as a structural party, don't talk immigration, talk about the NHS. Well, actually, they may have been convinced by the NHS, but they wanted to know we'd listened on immigration. Other people, you can go straight to the other arguments. So I think the truth is, you don't need thousands of arguments, but this is going to make you worse off. Immigration has got its problems, but it's got its benefits. Who do you trust to tell you the truth? Those are the three that will get you through most conversations in my view.
Two more, John. I'm conscious of your time. Yes, I'm sorry.
Get back to
two questions. Okay.
Yeah, well, partly I wanted to come back to what Ian was saying about the young vote, because I think that's very key to getting a Remain result. Luckily, we've had Alex Jensen, who is a Labour Party member, who was running stalls within the University Library, basically running out where are you on the 23rd of June, so the young people know where they're going to be in order to be registered locally. The main issue I find, being on the streets, is a general apathy amongst younger people, because I think they see the job market as a whole, where there aren't the opportunities out there, and they see that as being an issue with the EU. They don't see it as being an issue with government here, or local issues, because, fortunately, we've got a pretty awful council, which the policies that are having are actually affecting the younger people quite significantly. I'm just keen. Luckily, we do have the benefit of the university people. They did do a debate, and I think 91% or so, a high percentage of students were on the Remain side. But then you're talking about the educated as opposed to the working class, the people out there. There is a complete distinction there.
Yeah.
And trying to actually engage with those people on the street, they don't want to hear.
Yes.
We can think, well, hopefully they won't vote to leave, but trying to actually get them onto Remain. That's what my key target really is over the next 2 weeks, because I think we will win or lose this locally based on that.
Yes, another question.
John, thanks for what you said. I wondered if you've got any comments about post-referendum, whether it's we remain, like to be by a whisker, about reform issues and EU and positioning of the Labour Party, and if there was Brexit, any comments, advice on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, that's crystal balls. I mean, one of the things that I think is very important is that if, and I hope we do, we win, I think it's very important that we say from the day afterwards that this is the start of the campaign for reform of the EU. What we say and what we recognise is what the vast majority of people will have been saying, is that on balance they want to stay in the EU, they want the EU changed. They want to deal with issues of democracy, of getting decision making down to the local level, of not having unnecessary stuff at the beginning, of stronger action around state and innovation and productivity and all of those sorts of things, you know, which we could go into in some detail. But I think it's very important we strike the right tone. It'd be a disaster to sort of say, well, we've won and that's it, and now let's carry on as we were before. If it doesn't go that way, and I also think, by the way, that there will be a particular job for the Labour Party, because however well we do in the next fortnight, some of the people who voted for us in the past won't be voting with this group of people on this side on Thursday. And actually continuing to campaign to make it clear we understand the whole range of issues, not just the immigration thing, but the way the economy has changed, the way their opportunities have changed, that we're actually going to deal with those issues, and that's what the Labour Party is for. That's what is very important. We've got to avoid the situation that's wiped out the Labour Party of Scotland, where post-referendum the Labour Party appeared to have nothing to say, and the groups of working class voters have voted for independence. So that's going to be critical for us. If, God forbid, it goes the other way, I mean, it's very difficult to be honest, to crystal ball, because a lot can depend on the maths. You know, if Scotland, for example, votes to stay and England votes to leave, that might provoke calls for a further referendum in Scotland. It's not clear how that will go, because actually it's not clear that the option of Scotland joining the EU from outside the EU will be on anybody's agenda, and Scotland being independent of an independent UK doesn't look terribly good unless the oil price goes up an enormous amount at the moment. So that's there could be definitely no political reaction within the European Union, you know, an intensification of sort of English national identity and Scottish resentment about the English in Scotland. I mean, basically, we've got to face the fact that if we lose, this will be a pretty dysfunctional country for quite a considerable period of time to come. We don't just sort of send the cheque back or ask for the cheque back or whatever the language is on the 24th if we lose. Disentangling ourselves will take ages. Our own politics will be paralysed by that. If you think the divisions in the Tory party are something now, just imagine what politics will be like when you have a House of Commons arguing about whether to accept the particular terms that are being negotiated. We nobody's got any doubt that the referendum will be binding. This talk about MPs ignoring the referendum, that's rubbish. It's not going to happen. There will still be lots of legitimate room for argument about particular deals and agreements that are reached on particular aspects of negotiation. It will clog up our political system, our decision making and our politics for the next 5-10 years. I don't know, I'm not an expert on it. It's going to be very, very long time.
One at the back there, going to talk about it very shortly.
Okay. So it's going to be very, very difficult indeed.
Okay. John, you've got to go on now.
I'm afraid, yeah.
Can we thank John?
Thank you very much.
I think we have now a little. Before you go. Oh no, we don't have a break. We have an introduction to the rough. Be introduced by Frank.
You're going to do an introduction.
Running through the menu. Running through the menu. Okay. Sorry. Introduce the rough.